Okay, welcome to the 38th episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today, I'm excited to be speaking to Dillibe Onyeama. Dilibe is a Nigerian author and publisher. Dilibe was the first Black boy ever to graduate from Eton College and only the second to join when he started in 1965. In 1972, aged just 21, he wrote about his experiences of Eton. The book is a deeply personal account of the racism he endured during his times as a student at the world-famous institution. He has written 28 books, published in 4 countries. Welcome, Dilibe.
Thank you very much indeed.
So, I reached out to you. Someone recommended I read the book, and I read it, and it was like really, really powerful. Both, some tears, but also kind of really recognizing a lot of, your story, having been to boarding school myself. So that's why I reached out. So I'd love you to share some of your journey at Eton, please, Dilibe. How was it for you?
Well, it was interesting. It was interesting from the point of view that it was an eccentric choice for a sub-Saharan pupil to be enrolled in an educational system that was created by English royalty and never established an African background in mind. So it was interesting, it was an eye-opener, but I was still on familiar territory because I had been to prep school for 5 years. So I was no stranger to English custom, way of life. So I was there at prep school, other boys who were going to public school. So we sort of had the same outlook. So it wasn't anything really new in that respect. It wasn't as if I was coming directly from Africa and joining in college for the first time. So it was like I moved with the tide from prep school, which was designed to prepare pupils for public school education. So from that aspect, I was sort of part of the madding crowd, so to speak. But it wasn't anything outlandish because it was expected. I've been prepared for it, trained for it. And so it was sort of a natural process from prep school to public school. The other boys who were at my prep school or my school. And so it wasn't anything outlandish from that point of view. I wasn't new to English culture. So it was an interesting experience, yeah. The only difference, marked different visually, was I was not a milk-colored pupil. I was more, it's all coffee-colored. So that was the only discrepancy, so to speak. But it was still an interesting, an eye-opener. It was interesting. Long and short, it was interesting to start with. It was interesting, yes. Okay. As time went on, then obviously you encountered different. Generally speaking, you're encountering supreme quality in every turn of life. Everything was supreme quality. Creation, education, everything, privileges. There's second to none. It was the cream, the tea milk of English scholastic refinement, designed by English royalty. So it was something, it was a privilege, it was an eye-opener. There's nothing to compare it with it in Nigeria or any other part of the world, really. So it was like eccentricity of the choice of a Black African pupil.
And would you be able to explore a little bit why Eton was chosen for you? To say a little bit about your father's background.
During the colonial administration in Nigeria, there was King's College, Lagos, which was being run by former English public school pupils. And it was modeled on the same traditions, the same manner, everything of the English public school. And so my father was, it was his alma mater.
Yeah.
He went there and he was impressed. But you see, the difference between what he experienced and what the reality in England was that the colonialists wanted to bring the best, showcase the best, the English finesse at its best. And the white man was presented as a perfect gentleman, pure in word, thought, and deed. And so the African pupils just had this exposed to the very cream of English culture. Everything was proper, well organized, strict, and it's like heaven on earth.
Mm-hmm.
When my father went to England later on to study law, he saw a film called Tom Brown's School Days.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yes, in which the hero was roasted over fire in the sort of traditional ragging.
Yeah.
And he was impressed. He was turned on by that because he said, good, there is a human face to Englishman. It wasn't the sort of the perfect gentleman, the perfect angel, which they've been trained to believe at King's College, Lagos. He saw a human face and he was sort of tickled by the idea of ragging and rough and tumble and horseplay and tough people. And this is what he liked. He said that he planned to send his children to English public schools. He liked the English public schools system, the way he saw it in England. In reality of it, he liked the rascals, everything else, good and bad. So when he was appointed a magistrate, his friends, his English friends in government, they would say, "Oh, congratulations on being appointed magistrate, and congratulations on the birth of your second son. Is he going to follow your footsteps?" And so yes. Which would you recommend? Which public school you recommend I should send him to in England? They said, "Well, if you want the best, send him to Eton College." And he laughed. He said, "No, something more modest." He wasn't thinking of his children, sons rubbing shoulders with English royalty, the sons of English. They said, "No." They said, "Oh, no, it's not like that. Send him to Eton College. They'll take him." They had a very good record, everything else.
Mm.
And they said, "Well, leave it to us. We'll go and arrange it." And while he was in chambers one day, got a letter from Provost and Fellows saying, "We had a letter to tell you that your son's been accepted, blah, 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 blah." That was how it all happened. That was sort of the gist of the story, really. So it wasn't actually his choice. His choice was rugby. He saw the film. He saw the film, Tom Brown's School is set in rugby. He was thinking in terms of rugby for his son.
Okay. So
he just happened to he never set his own views. He liked to gather opinion. His views never arbitrary. He liked to hear other people say, "So which do you think is the best school to send him to?" But well, if you want the best, and be in college. That was how it all happened. Because his choice was rugby. But when they said, no, send me in college, everything else, he said, "Okay, fine." So he put my name down and had very good testimonials. He went to England as a top-ranking Freemason in England, and then came back to Nigeria, became a magistrate, the judge, everything else. So he was in very good stead. So the Eton says, yes, they put my name down. I was born, more or less. That was how it all happened.
Fascinating. Thank you. Yeah, so I guess my second question really was, what was the difference between Grove Park and then moving to Eton? Were they the same, vastly different?
Well, it's vastly different from the perspective that Grove Park was a preparatory. There's a tradition of preparatory school preparing for public schools. And these are kiddies, 5 years up to 13 years old. And so the concept was when you go into public school, you're maturing, you now become sort of adults, entry adulthood. So they're preparing for adulthood. And so obviously, I mean, at prep school, you're all comrades and it's like family. It's a small school, I think about 40, 50 pupils or something. We're all very close, very, very close knit. And we sort of got on well together. Nobody noticed my color, nobody noticed my race. We were all, and the matrons and teachers were beautiful people. They always gave glowing testimonials to Africa and spoke highly of Africa. When Nigeria got independence, the headmaster called a party to celebrate Nigeria's independence. And at prayers, he prayed for Nigeria at independence. I had a tea party, ice cream, cakes, everything else. So it was just like heaven at prep school. Yeah. And I was also reminded by my one of the teachers, well, when you get to public school, it shouldn't be so rosy as it is now. It shouldn't be just a bowl of cherries. There will be some tough times ahead, and you'll find that there are some people who will start talking about your color, but don't let it bother you at all. Don't let it bother you. They call you this, so you're that. So I was prepared in that regard. I was still there. You're going to encounter some discrimination. But generally speaking, prep school was, you wish you could relive it. But then when you got to public school, then you knew that you're now in that level of maturity where it's like you have to be tough, you have to be responsible, everything else. And so that was the difference. You were aware of the differences of prep school, public school. So that was, you moved on to the next rung of the ladder scholastically. So really you were prepared. But one would prefer prep school, of course, actually, because you're pampered, mollycoddled, and everything else.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like in your book that you were almost prepared for your experience at Eton at the, I think it was the Vickers, the place, the residence. Yes. You were there at holiday. Could you explain a bit what happened there?
There was my father got this guardian, a Reverend Cox, was his name was, and he had a holiday. He used his vicarage to make some sort of business as a holiday home for foreign students, foreign pupils. Mm-hmm. And so every holiday you see about 12, 13 pupils, men and both sexes, both coming together to holiday there. And he wanted me to be mindful of the fact that when you're going to Eden, you're going to be ragged. And he set some of my contemporaries there to put me through some challenges, ragging, teasing, everything else. I didn't like it. I used to react. And he called me and said, look, you're not getting on well with boys. I know. You're preparing for college. You're going to be ragged, everything else. So I said, okay, fine. So it was all like preparatory to helping me to have a foretaste of what they thought I was going to experience. Although they were not happy on color, but just basically teasing. That was basically, so they thought that I was going to get ragged. So I prepared to be ragged. When I got to Eton College and I met the ragging, that I don't think they anticipated. My tormentors anticipated that I would react, and I reacted contrary to expectations. And I was outnumbered, but when they reacted, when they called me all these racial names, I was very, very, very violent indeed, and they were terrified. It was like 1-1 in that regard, although I was outnumbered.
How long was it when, and what was the point? How many weeks or maybe days or even hours did you put up with the ragging before you just went, whoa, had enough?
I think that very first term, initially the teasing jokes, oh, will you do a war dance to celebrate coming to college? You live in a house in Nigeria. I thought you lived in a mud house. It's also a question to start with initially. You got, but after a time, when they start talking, saying war and nigger, go back to the filth where you belong, and jungle, then I started reacting, and very violent indeed. And there was some injury. I inflicted some injuries on quite a few. And although they felt safer in numbers, there would be numbers and say something, but they wouldn't come one-on-one and say it to me directly. But I was always physically, I had no challenge at all. So everything was oral from their point. Mine was physical. Mm-hmm. And I know I was outnumbered, but at any rate, I was able to deliver some very hefty punches to quite a few people, and they'll never forget it. I'm sure up to now.
Yeah.
Just in boxing, the boxing ring.
Yeah. You mentioned that was one of your channels, was to go and box. You were great at cricket as well in the second 11.
Yeah, well, I wasn't a Gary Sobers in cricket, but
No.
I used to bowl, and they said I was a demon bowler.
Yeah.
But to me, it was, I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't Gary Sobers. I wasn't Jesse Owens in running. I wasn't Muhammad Ali in boxing. But still, they wanted to say it that way. Because you're black, you're so a giant ape or something. It was exaggerated. Like in football, you kick the ball, and because it went far, they say, "Gosh, it was exaggerated."
Mm-hmm.
It's all subconscious racism, really. Subconscious.
Yeah. And did you find that? So it sounds like it started in that first term. Did you find that after the second year, third year, that it stopped?
No, it never stopped. It stopped in my last term. And the reason it stopped is because there was a debate. And the debate was hinged on Enoch Powell's views on race. Enoch Powell was saying all blacks should go home, everything else. And there's a school debate. And I was going to participate in the debate. And of course, at the end of the day, I was like, it's like 500 to 3 of us supporting Powell. And then the scandal, I was doing hypnotism, and they were saying it's voodoo. People go to the press and say, this man is doing voodoo spells on people. And the headmaster came out vicious, angrily, and said, this is all lie. Someone is getting at this young man. It's not, we don't like it. It's not true at all. He's being tormented. And he came out to indict perceived tormentors. He said somewhere in the school who had been influenced negatively by Powell's views on race. And that when I first came to school, he received a huge post from Manchester, Birmingham, insulting him and threatening him for having Africans in the school.
Really? When
the thing became world news, front pages in all the Britain, voodoo war, even African boy, eaten by accused of voodoo, everything else. It became world news. That was when all the racial abuse stopped. Because the headmaster saw these tormentors were in the school, so nobody wanted to be identified. So my last term was rosy. Oh, everyone was VIP too. That's when it stopped, more or less. The last year, last 2 terms, it sort of simmered. And when there was a school play, which I was, as usual, played the slave, I think Antony and Cleopatra. And somebody said, look, the part you play is very, very small. Why not do a Black Power salute at the end of sort of to draw some sort of, I said, well, that's a good idea. When the curtain call, and everybody was saying hello, so the ovation, I came, the clenched-fisted salute, and there was people roared with laughter, and of course it was in headlines. Eton boy, Black Power saluted. So from then onwards, I think those people who were racist, so slung into the shadows, they didn't want to be identified. So the last 2 terms you're okay, but before that, it was a sort of touch and go, really.
Wow, so that sounds like you had 3 terms each year. That was 4 years, so that's nearly 14 terms, or
Yes, it was also interlarded with beautiful times, beautiful customs, privileges. I mean, it was like you're living this life of Riley, and I said to you, supreme quality, everything, and which were enjoyable. The occasions which like Christmas festivities, celebrations, Founders' Day celebrations, they're good times which somehow cushioned the traumatic effects of racial insults.
Mm.
So there's like a bad, there's good, it's like the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Starting to plagiarize Clint Eastwood, but anyway, yeah, that was some good times were there.
Yeah.
Bad times were there, and the really ugly times were there. But generally speaking, it was a profitable outing. We learned, having imbibed the niceties of English finesse. You could hold your on any. You've been through exposed, sort of leaders of the establishment, players of the ruling class, and imbibed all those niceties, traditions of community, courtesy, and culture. So you said, well, you can hold yourself anywhere in the world at all. You learned a lot, and also gave you insight into human relations. So there were benefits which I'm still enjoying until this day.
Yeah.
And I'm here in Nigeria, in a sort of third world country. I'm not bothered at all. Because when you've been to that experience in that school, you can hold yourself anywhere, in any condition, any situation at all. And that is the principal benefit of having a school there. You can't see anything better than what you've seen there.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm hearing there was a lot of negative, but there was a lot of benefits. You talk about that in the book.
Well, yes. I mean, right now, I'm 71 years old, and I'm in a volatile third world environment. And many of Africans who had something similar have all fled back to London, back to the West. They're fleeing brain drain crisis. But I'm still here. I'm managing. I'm contented. I'm in control. So I'm not, that is in consequence of having been to that school. Many of my peers here, African peers, relations, cousins, who were in England with me, so most of them died off. Frustration, everything else. Nigeria is like a raucous rugby scrum to survive. If you're talking in terms of, there's not like Queensberry rules in the struggle for survival. The Queensberry rules have been trampled underfoot. And it's like the law of the jungle. And many people who've been to England couldn't survive. They run away. But when you've been to college, you know how there's certain kind of exposure you've had, which you rise above it all. It's a problem. That is in consequence. Sorry, having been to college. If I hadn't been there, I don't think I would have survived at all.
So it kind of prepared you for the challenge.
Prepared you for anything in life. Because you had, you were trained in charity work, you were trained in many privileges, which prepared you to face any situation in the world. It was a benefit in many ways. It's also at the same time, it showed you that the savagery of the very rich, which but back home in my home environment, you learn how to humble yourself.
Yeah.
So, but it was a blessing in a way.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing that, because that was one of my questions for later on about what were the good things, and it sounds like, it gave you a lot of resilience, helped you to deal with challenges, to cope with what It's interesting because I lived in Ghana. People would often say about Nigeria, they never used a raucous rugby scrum, but they said it's quite a wild place.
It is. That's putting it mildly, yes. Putting it mildly.
Yeah.
Nigeria it's you have to be the devil. It's like a devil's game, It's a tough society, and not many people are surviving it. Especially those who went to England.
Yeah.
Most of them are gone. Yeah.
Just let you take it. So I guess one of the things which really stuck out as I was reading the book was, the bit towards the end where you shared about the South Africans who came to the school. And that kind of
Yes.
stood out to me because obviously I'd grown up with this impression of the apartheid, and I've read Nelson Mandela's book. And I mean, your words were, I wondered also why I had more common decency shown to me by these two South Africans by almost any other white boy at Eton. So these two South Africans, I'd love you to share a little bit about that story, about who they were and what happened.
Well, I mean, the tradition of Eton College is to invite foreign students to come about a year or two, a few terms. And one of those foreign students was in my division. And I saw him in my division. He was quiet. And what actually brought a connection was when one of those jokers at Eton College came to him and said, "Are you one of those funny guys from those funny countries?" I said, "Oh, yes." He said, "Which country are you from?" "South Africa." When I said South Africa, I was curious because that was apartheid was in existence. Mm-hmm. So I went to him and said, "Hi, you're from South Africa?" Yes, yes. Are you American? I said, "No, I'm from Africa." "Africa." Yes. We were talking, and the same joker came before. Said, "Hey, don't start fighting, you two. Don't you start fighting. This is England, not South Africa." That's how that relationship was sealed. And then he was also quite vulnerable because he was only there for temporarily. And so he had the sense to show diplomacy in his interactions. We spoke everything else, his body language. And we got friendly, and he was charming all the time. And he couldn't afford to conduct himself in any way that would reflect and bring back the reality of apartheid. So he was very, very careful and diplomatic, and he knew how to talk, what to say at any given moment in time. So we had good times, the two of them, and he introduced the other chap. We had tea together, we was exchanging good words, and I said, "Well, gosh, these chaps are nice." But then, in retrospect, they couldn't afford to be otherwise. It wouldn't go down well. I'm sure the school authorities wouldn't like to hear that these people coming to introduce apartheid. I mean, so it was the water surface remained calm, and there was no problem at all. I said, "Well, gosh, if all my other contemporaries were as civilized and amiable as these two, I would have no problem at all in the school." That was the sort of comparison. They are good chaps, but then I think good sense prevailed that they could be otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And I mean, the next question I had was really about in your schoolwork. So in the research I've done and the work I do, you mentioned about division. When you were in division, I think this is page 119, because when I encountered racist abuse in some division, I was thus unable to fully concentrate on the teaching. Do you feel the bullying impacted your ability to study? Or do you feel, because I know you said about Grove Park, that, and also your schooling before you went to Grove Park, you were more relaxed around schooling?
Well, I mean, let's put it this way: it didn't help. What's the sort of the racial innuendos in this one encountered didn't help your academic progress. It didn't help matters at all. But I wouldn't say, generally speaking, that it impacted negatively on my results, because I passed the O levels with glowingly. Some of my contemporaries who used to be abusive racially, they failed, and they were sacked from the school because they failed. But I went, swimmingly across, and I was my education was finished the school, but the headmaster gave me my school leaving book, certificate, so to speak. So, I mean, I didn't think on the strength of that reality, I consider the racial encounters impacted my studies negatively. Because at the end of the day, I passed my exams and left with school leaving certificate and testimonial, everything else. It didn't help because the sort of the prototype, oh, the black man is stupid, he's brainless, he can't think, can't do well. Although I wasn't the best academic there, but at any rate, I was able to make my way academically and leave certificate, complete my studies, and move on to follow my career. So the answer is no, it didn't negatively impact my education, my school pursuits.
Okay, thank you. In 1972, you wrote your book. You published your book about Eton, and could you explain a little bit what happened? What did the school say once you published it, and what was your reaction or your response to that?
Before the book came out, it was serialized in a magazine in England, 2 parts. And the serialization outraged the school governors, and they imposed a ban on me from visiting the school until further notice. And they went the extra mile to try to suppress the publication of the book itself. They rang the publisher, Leslie Fruin, because the book wasn't called that title then.
No,
It wasn't called, but published under a different title. And the headmaster rang the publisher and said, "Couldn't you just drop this book, blah, blah, blah." The publisher said, "Well, I can't accommodate you." He tried that. Then the city sheriff came on the phone, publisher, "Want a book, want to see it?" He said, "Well, you can't have it." And then the wife of, that was the school. And I believe the headmaster wasn't acting on his own initiative. He was acting out an order at the behest of the provost, the governing body. And among that governing body, amongst them, there was the voice from the palace, a chap I'm sure you've heard of called Lord Carrington. Lord Carrington, he used to be minister of overseeing Commonwealth and everything else. And he was bent that that book should be stopped. And he put pressure on the headmaster to go and try and do everything he could to stop the book. They tried. They couldn't. The headmaster, the publisher, Leslie Fruin, he's a tough Englishman. You couldn't intimidate him. And they tried everything. They said, no. We are a platform for informed opinion. That was his answer. This doesn't necessarily mean we agree with the author, but at any rate, I think this is right. He has a right to recount his experiences, and he wouldn't budge on that. Then other people tried to stop the book. The wife of the late Ian Fleming, the chap who produced James Bond, he was at Eton College. And I was at school with his son, Caspar. And his wife, Anne Fleming, was very influential, very, very influential. And Caspar happened, unfortunately, to be found with a loaded gun in his room. He was in my house. And I was a journalist. I'd left the school, and I gave the story to the Sunday Express. It's an exclusive. It was published. I think Anne Fleming heard that I was the person who leaked the story, and also heard I was in a book called Nigger At Eton, and she rang the publisher. She read publisher threatening to send to hell if anything appeared in the book pertaining concerning her son. Well, I said, Fruin is a tough goat. He couldn't sort of say anything to him and get away with it. And so, but then, at the end of the day, nothing in the book about Ian Fleming and son. And the book came out, but and when it came out, it got such good press around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And Eton wasn't happy at all.
Mm-hmm.
They banned me. When initially they banned me, I went to a chap called Lord Aaron, who had a column in Evening News called the Aaron column, complained to him. He said, "You should report him to Restitution Board." I did that. Because Restitution Board, you know, is an old boy network. You know, you're so like, well, let me just on record that I've made a complaint. And the race board said, "Oh, well, the reason why you were banned is because you wrote something bad against the school, not because you're black." I said, "Well, look, how about other people written terrible things about the school in college,
Mm-hmm.
who happen to be milk colored? They weren't banned. So why should I be banned? Wasn't I milky enough for my complexion?" That was how all that played out. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Drama. Again, of course, the press made a feast of it. So all that happened took place, and ban came. Nothing came up. The headmaster wrote my father, the international court judge. Said, look, your son's done this, did that, blah, 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 blah. I said, "Oh, jolly good for you. Well done, well done." Also, his way of saying, "Please keep me out of it if you don't mind. I don't get involved." So it was all drama at that time. Of course, you know. And the book came out with Great Kula Balu, and everybody was happy, except Eton College.
Yeah, yeah. And how did you respond? You know, because obviously you were banned. I mean, how long did the ban stay in place for?
The ban stayed in place for until about, let's say about 2010. I got a letter from Eton College. There's a tradition they have, an annual tradition, whereby boys who left in a certain term will come back to celebrate. And so meet up and go to chapel prayers, have dinner, and talk about their progress. Can't recall, it's old boy reunion.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a letter saying, "Come, your group left in so year. So please let us know if you're coming in, blah, blah." So, well, look, I wrote this, "Well, what are you talking about? I'm on your banned list. If you just ask me if I'm banned, how are you now saying to me, come back for your reunion? What are you trying to tell me? Am I not banned? If I come there, will I not be arrested?" And so the woman said, "Oh, well, let me go and find out." So she went to the headmaster and said, "Oh, you're free to come back anytime at all, blah, 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 blah." And then I said, "Okay, fine, send me a letter to the British Embassy so they can give me a visa." And the letter reflected that it was all sort of tongue in cheek. It was, they didn't mean it. It was letter said something that was very subtle, asking for a visa for 2 years later on. I said, "What are you playing at? You're not serious. You guys just jokers. You're just saying lip service." It didn't mean ban. It didn't mean actually I'm released from ban. You're just saying so. And I didn't take them seriously. So for a long time, I didn't have the communication, although I used to get letters from Old Etonian Association. Then about 2 years ago, there was this George Floyd killing in America by a police one. And then this triggered riots, Black Lives Matter. And of course, riots was worldwide, even in England. There was uprising about black color prejudice. And the BBC asked me, "Oh, well, how you went to prejudice in college?" "Oh, well, yes." "Are you going to get an apology from me?" I said, "Well, I have no idea." Next thing, I got the letter from the college headmaster on email apologizing for racism I had. I'm going to press and tell them that they are apologizing to me. Then you're no longer banned. And I would like a situation where you come over and we present an apology to you in person. That was about 2 years ago. And a year later, then this book came out, the new edition from Penguin of my book. Came out about a year or two. It came out this year, actually, in February. Yeah. So this is how it's all happening. So I'm free from the band, but right now, with the plague, COVID, everything else, I want to stay put in here in Nigeria.
So that's basically 50 years you were banned from Eton.
Yeah. So 97, yes, 71, the first ban. Yes, when the magazine was published, it was serializable. But then 71, I got the ban. So about 51 years, yeah, that's correct.
Wow. Oh, thank you. So how are you doing time-wise? I'm probably been going about 40 minutes so far.
Yeah, well, if you have any more questions, I'll actually answer them.
Yeah, I still have a few questions. I mean, one of the ones that really resonated with me was this thing about hallucinations and violence, self-violence that you spoke about in the book, because I could resonate because I went through a similar experience, although it was later in my 20s. And I just wondered, how you learned to deal with this, because I hear a lot of ex-boarders in my work who have these flashbacks, they call them. And
I was in boxing. That was my favorite sport at school, in boxing. In the privacy of my room, I'll be shadow boxing, doing all the moves, everything else. Then I remember those. I remember these tormenting brats, and I imagine them as like they're in the ring with me there, and then just sort of popping them, smashing them to pop, and getting violent, and imagining they were there in the room, calling me all names, and I just punching them to pop. It used to happen. There was a passing phase. I complained to Dame if there's any medicine I could take, and they said no, we'll try. It was a bit confused, but it happened. About a year or two, periodically, suddenly you get flashes of anger. You're making boxing and punching thin air, but wishing you were punching faces, those white faces. Yes, I went through that period, yes.
Thank you. I did exactly the same thing. It was later in my 20s, imagining these people punching them. How did you learn to deal with these? How did you learn?
And other things were happening in the school. So one was able to get distracted from those hallucinations. Other thing, I mean, the general life in school, this is just like one personal encounter in my private moments. And I was a boxer, I was shadow boxing. Then suddenly my opponent was no longer someone in the ring. Then my opponent was suddenly jeering, insulting, cheeky pupils. So I was punching them. Imagine I was punching them, and I suddenly became exhausted, and I collapsed in the chair in exhaustion. I mean, punched them out, so to speak.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you. It's kind of, as I read, it was the first time I'd really heard someone else write about it, so I kind of was really touched. I guess the one of the other questions I have is to talk a little bit about Blackett Ord, who was one of the house captains, and to put into context, there was all before kind of his reign in the house, there was a lot of fagging, beating, fining, and it sounds like when he came in as a house captain, he not only changed the ethos in the house, but then that went into the rest of the school as well. Could you explain a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, the permissive society outside was like a magnet of yearning. The mundaneness of posh life, like something like a bore to many people. They wanted to get outside from the adventure of the open world and break away from royal type existence. And so there was a sort of rebellion in the school. Discipline had gone through the door, and people were rebelling against coercion and rules, regulations. People were rebelling against it, and after a time, things changed. There's no more beating, they banned beating, they banned fagging, and then people, it's like a free for all. This is what people were looking for, and they wanted something to coincide with the permissive society outside, in the outside world. And when the school ended, you see people dressed in bell-bottom trousers and like teddy boys, everything else, and garishly painted cars and long hair, everything else. So there was a rebellion against that old order, and it resonated in all the houses. One particular housemaster tried to initiate a change, and he was sacked, and the boys rebelled and put up legends in Nash, out Trench. Genevieve Trench was the headmaster, and he was not popular. But this rebellious housemaster was also very popular. But then he got sacked, and so the whole system broke down. It's no longer the established old order of royalty, everything else. It's now change. The process of change has now come to school, so everything just radically changed. Everyone became a master unto himself, so to speak.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was like, yeah, quite a big change which happened from being very strict with banning, fagging, what Black Edward introduced in your house, kind of
live and let live. Live and let live.
Live and let live. Yeah.
Prevailing classes as well. You've got masters who couldn't exert authority in their classes. You get people who used to abuse the master, oh, go to hell, bloody hell. They said, well, we'll leave the class if you want to leave the class. He was like, I'm gonna hate you, sir. This is how the depth which is degenerated. Rebellion, there was rebellion in all the classes. And one particular pupil in my house drank whiskey and left thinking so the headmaster wrote him and said, come back and get beaten. Otherwise you should get no testimony from me. Then he'd left, but he had a binge drinking whiskey, everything else before he left. And he reported to the headmaster. He thought he got away with it. The headmaster wrote back and said, no, come back, you get beaten. Otherwise I should give you no testimonial. He came back and the headmaster caned him 6 strokes. That's punishment. Otherwise, if he didn't do that, then he'd give him no testimonial. Without testimony, he couldn't go to Oxford University. It was as bad as that. Things got out of hand. Yeah. And in the end, the headmaster himself had to leave. He wasn't performing. He wanted to change everything.
Yeah. So it seemed like it was quite chaotic. Did things kind of settle down after that headmaster left?
The headmaster didn't leave in my time. The housemaster left, but his leaving precipitated a crisis. It was like demonstrations, putting posters, lampooning the headmaster and praising that rebellious housemaster who left.
Yeah.
Things calmed down at the end towards the time, but quite a few boys were sacked, expelled.
Okay.
Many people got disciplined by the headmaster for being rebellious. But I was always in his good books because,
Good. So, I guess, do you feel now, Dilibe, that, obviously what happened to you was, say, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Do you feel that what happened there changed since those times? And do you feel as well that Eton has changed as well? Or is it kind of similar things? Things are quite similar.
It has changed with the times. Time changes people, and it has conformed to the rules of change. For instance, now 10% of all the pupils are Black.
Right.
1,300 pupils, 200 people, about 120 people, Black students there. And very many of them were prefects, school prefects. So it has changed. It has changed radically, in fact. Become much more cosmopolitan. Many more foreign faces there. And it's just mellowed, and there's nothing like beating or anything like that at all. It's become more cosmopolitan. Things changed a lot because of Black Lives Matter and Race Relations Act. So people being very, very, the school wanted to do like public relations exercise by opening its doors further on to allow more Black peoples. That also happened, yes.
Mm-hmm.
It has changed, yes. The headmaster who said I can come and get an apology, he rang me. Was telling me how many of their pupils are now in privileged positions, scholars, Black Africans, everything else. But I'm curious to know when they'll start having Black teachers. I can't see that happening at all. I can't see that happening.
Yeah, that would be a great.
Unless, because it will be very controversial, because the scholastic system there would not compare favorably with what discoveries about African history. I mean, if you talk about teaching Greek history or Latin and everything else, it may compare unfavorably, because findings have now shown that the teachings of some of these religious Greek, Latin are quite at variance with what Africans would insist is not their history. So right now, you're dealing with a situation where it's only the pupils who are Black. Not It will be interesting to see if it will change in that direction.
Sounds like that's the next step.
Sorry, you're saying, God, yes?
So that sounds like that's the next step, to have Black masters.
It's it's interesting to see if it happens. Very interesting, very controversial. Already, although it hasn't been said openly, if you remember, not long ago, there was a big controversy with regard to old Etonians who were insisting on, what was it they called it? Spoke. I can't recall the controversy about Eton College is changing in the wrong direction, it's going in the wrong direction. It should become more, I can't recall, there was a big controversy.
Yeah.
And I'm suspecting, I have reason to suspect that may be as a consequence of the apology, which didn't go down too well with many of my contemporaries at all.
Yeah, maybe it's woke. I think there was a teacher who was...
Yes, that's the word, woke, yes.
Yeah, a teacher who was fired because he allowed the boys to have a debate about a subject. I'm not sure what the subject was, but they all really loved it, and yet I think he was then fired because it was like, oh no, you're not allowed to talk.
Yeah, well, yes, that is correct. Yes.
So yeah, it sounds like what I'm hearing is it has changed, and and the headmaster's reached out to you and spoken to him, and it sounds like the next step would be, and see where it goes, of having Black teachers in.
I think it's gone as far as it's ever going to go.
Okay.
I mean, basically, students are now, it's cosmopolitan. All nationalities are being represented, of varying hue, and that is the be-all and end-all, really. I can't see. I mean, this is royal, built by English royalty, and I don't think it was ever built, although it's changing with the times within reason, royalty is still English royalty. These are the people who colonized Africa. And I don't think it's going to change beyond a certain boundary. There's a certain extreme. There's a boundary which it reach, and I think it's gone as far as it will possibly go. The students are peoples out there enjoying everything else, but I can't see it going beyond that. I mean, for instance, if you want an example, look at the marriage of Prince Harry and Meghan.
Meghan, yeah.
That should show you. That should the illustration. That should like guide as to how far in college go. I mean, Meghan came out and rebelled, and she didn't like it. I said, "To hell! This is a racist institution." And so everything that's happening at Eton College is tongue-in-cheek diplomacy. Tongue-in-cheek diplomacy. The limit to which you can go. I mean, and that experience of Harry, and to some extent the husband of late Princess Diana, was an eloquent example of how far the school can go with regard to change.
Yeah. Interesting. Have you ever heard of Alex Renton? Because he was at Eton, I think possibly after you, but he was. He wrote a book last year, I think it was published, about his family, and that a lot of them were slavers. And he's written a book exposing just where a lot of the money came from.
From Uganda, right? What's his name again?
Alex Renton, Renton. I'll send you a link to the podcast I did with him a couple of years ago.
Is he Africa?
He's not. He's based in Scotland. So his basically his family were all based in Scotland, and he a white man, but a lot of his family, they were involved in the slave trade, and so he's written a book about it, about his family's involvement to try and expose what went on. I've not read it myself. I think it's called Blood.
What is that to expose? This is 400 years of a crime against a people just because they're black. People fight wars on territory, on politics, on ideology, on land, but the only thing you have against the black African is that he's black. That's why the whole world is dehumanizing the black man. So to go and say, yes, your family was part of the slave trade, royalty was part of the slave trade, English royalty was part of the slave trade, colonialism involved was part of the slave trade. So I don't think he's saying anything new. In the Royal English royalty, they are the people who went out and colonized and enslaved and everything else. It's a reality, but it isn't said. Okay, if you want an example, Prince Harry's brother went to Caribbean recently, and he was jeered. I think Prince Charles went somewhere recently, and they said, "You people go and pay reparations." So equality, is on very shaky grounds right now. I should say, because anything to do with slavery is English royalty is involved. That was so the power behind the throne of slavery.
So it sounds like
this gentleman. Sorry,
I was just thinking. It sounds like there needs to be some reparation by the royal family to apologize.
Well, putting it mildly, yes. Putting it mildly, yes. Putting it mildly. That is what they call. Harry went to Caribbean, and he was pretty well so sent off grace. Prince Charles went somewhere recently, and he was told to his face, "We want reparations." And it's the same thing as all this. Our author Chimamanda gave us a talk in Germany, and saying, "Bring back all our artifacts which you took by force." They belong to us. So all these things are part and parcel of the sort of reparations, really, essentially.
Yeah, interesting. I have a friend who's First Nation Canadian, and that's some of the work he's been doing, that a lot of their artifacts were stolen from them. He's going to the different museums in Ottawa and Quebec, getting these items back, which were their tribal heirlooms. And so, yeah, it's interesting how there's different people doing that. So, wow. Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, is there anything else you'd love to share with people?
No, nothing further. Nothing further. I should be thanking you for the chance to speak out, and I have nothing further to add or subtract what I've said already.
Yeah. Well, look,
I hope I've given you satisfactory information.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've really enjoyed the conversation. I think your signal at times has dropped off slightly, but I've understood everything. So hopefully the listeners will be able to understand everything. And yeah, I'd just like to say to everyone, please do read this book. You can get it on Amazon, or I think on your publisher Penguin as well. I'll put a link into the description where people can buy it from. But I found it really powerful to read, very eye-opening. And if you've been to boarding school, a lot of my listeners have been to boarding school, do recommend reading it. And you've written 28 books, so please do go and read the rest. I think there's about 13 on Amazon you can buy in the UK. I'll put a link to those as well in the description. But thank you.
Is there a way let me have a link to this interview, which I can give my publishers?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I will. It will go live probably next week. Yeah, and I will send a link to you once it's live. It's on iTunes, so that means listening, and also YouTube and Facebook, and I can send the link to that. So yeah, your publisher can have that.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
A pleasure. Well, thank you so much for your time.
All right. Have a blessed day.
Yeah, you too. Okay, bye-bye.